Chillicothe, Ohio, 2015. In an affluent, safe neighborhood, a place of manicured lawns and absolute security, a tasteless Halloween decoration appears, strung up on a chain-link fence. For one full day, the neighborhood's privileged residents see the figure. Joggers slow down, post pictures online, and laugh. Families point, letting their children shriek in mock terror. Even a police car, the sworn protectors of this safe community, slows, observes, and seeing nothing more than a prank, drives on. They all see, but they do not perceive. For 24 hours, an entire town looks directly at a victim and sees only a joke. They are all witnesses, not to a prank, but to a grotesque public crime. This is the story of a murder hidden in plain sight, and an injustice cemented by the very people who believed they had nothing to fear. The only person who truly saw was Solomon. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear this. Stories like this, stories of profound indifference and systemic betrayal, are painful. They only get told because you choose to listen. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Your presence here, bearing witness, matters. Now, let me tell you the story. Solomon, at 50 years old, was not a person. He was a fixture. He was the homeless man at the exit, a piece of unfortunate, inconvenient urban scenery on the edge of the affluent Chillicothe suburb they called the Enclave. He was a quiet, thickly bearded figure who sat, day after day, on a low concrete embankment near the bus stop bench, holding a small, neatly lettered cardboard sign. Veteran. Anything helps. God bless. He was, in every functional sense of the word, invisible. It was a Monday, just 3 days before Halloween. The air was cold, crisp, and the lawns of the Enclave were in the full, gaudy throes of the holiday. Solomon watched the preparations with a detached, mild amusement. This neighborhood didn't just participate in Halloween, it dominated it. Giant, inflatable black cats wobbled on pristine lawns. Elaborate. Store-bought spider webs were draped over meticulous shrubbery. Skeletons in pirate costumes sat on porch swings. It was a performance of abundance, a competition of casual expense. That morning, as the sun rose at 7:30, its weak, watery light struggling to burn through the Ohio overcast, Solomon noticed something new. He had been dozing, huddled deep in his sleeping bag in his alcove, and the sound of the early commute, the hiss of tires on the cold road, had woken him. He sat up, rubbing his stiff hands together, his gaze sweeping his familiar territory. And then he saw it. It hadn't been there when he'd tried to sleep at 2 a.m. He'd have noticed. Someone had been busy in the dark. Across the wide, 4-lane highway, on the chain-link fence that bordered a large, undeveloped wooded lot, a new decoration had appeared overnight. This lot was a dark, jarring gap in the neighborhood's perfect landscape, a patch of undesirable land waiting for the right developer. The fence was old, sagging, and lined with keep out signs. From his distance of perhaps 50 yards, the figure looked like a full-sized prop, a woman dressed in ragged clothes. It was posed as if it had been thrown with great force against the fence and had gotten caught there. Its form was limp, its head hanging down, a mass of dark, matted hair obscuring its face. One arm was hooked unnaturally through the diamond-shaped links of the fence, as if reaching, while the other dangled limply at its side. Solomon squinted, shaking his head. A cold feeling, unrelated to the morning frost, settled in his stomach. This was grotesque, tasteless. Even for a holiday that celebrated the macabre, this felt cruel, a step too far. The other decorations in the Enclave were theatrical, playful. This one, in its ragged stillness and its position of helplessness, felt aggressive, almost violent. It looked distressingly real, a prank designed to shock and disturb. He figured it was the work of some local high school kids or, more likely, fraternity pledges from the university a few towns over. It was a sick idea of a prank, a juvenile attempt to shock the wealthy residents. He turned away, trying to shake the image, pulling his sign onto his lap, his focus shifting to the passing cars. But the image lingered. He tried to ignore it, to relegate it to the background noise of his day, like the endless traffic or the chirping of the sparrows in the strip mall's gutters. But his eyes kept drifting back, drawn by a morbid gravity. The figure just hung there, motionless, a silent, grim silhouette against the flat, gray sky. It was a stark, ugly, and deeply disrespectful addition to the neighborhood's otherwise pristine holiday theater. As the day wore on, the traffic picked up. The morning joggers began their routes, and the neighborhood, far from being horrified or demanding the immediate removal of the offensive display, began to interact with it. Solomon watched, his initial disgust slowly morphing into a strange, detached, and deeply unsettling bewilderment. The figure wasn't just being ignored. It was being seen, and completely, utterly misunderstood by everyone who passed. The day became a slow, agonizing parade of profound, chilling indifference, all seen from Solomon's concrete embankment. The first jogger, a woman in bright pink lycra, approached around 8:15 a.m., her earbuds in, her gaze fixed forward. Solomon watched her slow down as she neared the fence, her pace breaking. She pulled out her phone. She didn't press it to her ear to call the police. She didn't look closer, her face etched with concern. She stopped, framed the figure on her screen, and took a picture. Solomon could see her laugh, a quick, sharp bark of amusement, shaking her head. She continued her run, her thumbs tapping away at her phone, likely posting the crazy or tasteless thing she'd just seen online, captioning it with a laughing emoji. A few minutes later, a landscaping truck, one of the many that kept the enclave's lawns a perfect, uniform green, pulled over. Two men in work clothes got out, stretching. They saw the figure, and one nudged the other, pointing. They both had a good, hearty laugh. One of them cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted something crude, something like, "Rough night, sweetheart," at the figure, before they got back in their truck, their laughter carrying on the cold, crisp air, and drove off. Solomon's stomach tightened. The casual cruelty of it, the ease with which people could turn a disturbing image into a joke, was unsettling. But the parade continued. People saw the figure, but not one person saw what it truly was. They processed it through the only filter that made sense in their safe, insulated world. It was a prank, a tasteless decoration, a piece of holiday ephemera. Around noon, a black luxury SUV pulled over. A mother, her hair in a perfect blonde bob, got out from the driver's side. She opened the back door, and her two young children, a boy and a girl, both bundled in expensive-looking coats, hopped out. The mother pointed at the figure on the fence. "Look, kids, how spooky is that?" The children, a boy of about 7 and a girl a little older, shrieked with a mixture of genuine fear and delighted excitement. The boy, emboldened, pretended to be a zombie, lurching towards the fence. The mother laughed, snapping a picture of her kids pointing in gleeful terror at the figure. Solomon watched the boy run up and kick the figure's dangling boot. The mother scolded him lightly. "Don't touch it, honey, it's filthy," before herding them back into the warmth of the car and driving off. The worst, for Solomon, came after school, around 3:30 p.m. A group of 4 or 5 teenagers on bicycles, their voices loud and cracking, rode up. This was the interaction Solomon had been dreading. They were loud, arrogant, emboldened by their numbers. "So sick," one of them yelled. "Who did this? It's awesome." They dared each other to get closer. Finally, one boy, clearly the leader, picked up a long, fallen branch. He ran up to the fence, his friends cheering him on and filming with their phones. He gave the figure a hard, sharp poke in the ribs. The figure swung limply, its arm rattling with a dry, hollow sound against the chain link. The boy's friends cheered and hollered. He poked it again, harder, this time in the head, making it loll to the side. He laughed, then dropped the stick. He seemed to see something. He reached through the fence, his back to Solomon, and tugged at the figure's dangling hand. He twisted something off, held it up like a trophy, and shouted, "Score!" His friends cheered, high-fived, and, their curiosity satisfied, they all jumped back on their bikes and rode off, their boisterous voices fading down the street. Solomon sat in his alcove, his heart heavy, a cold, sick feeling in the pit of his stomach. He felt a strange, unwelcome kinship with the figure on the fence. It, too, was an object of scorn, of casual amusement, of profound dehumanization. It was just a thing to be laughed at, photographed, kicked, and poked with a stick. He was disgusted by the teenagers, by the jogger, by the callousness of it all. But even then, through the long, cold, and deeply unsettling day, he, like everyone else, still believed it was just a prop, a sick, elaborate, and deeply disrespectful joke. The late afternoon sun, which had barely made an appearance all day, was beginning to dip, painting the gray sky in weak, cold shades of orange and purple. The temperature was dropping fast. Solomon zipped up his own worn-out jacket, his thoughts turning to the long, cold night ahead. It was in this fading, transitional light that he saw the police cruiser. It was moving slowly, on a routine patrol through the neighborhood, a familiar, comforting, and, for Solomon, sometimes threatening sight. The car, a standard white Ford, approached the intersection where he sat, its tires hissing quietly on the asphalt. And then, it slowed down. Its occupants, 2 officers, clearly having spotted the figure on the fence. Solomon tensed, a sudden, unexpected surge of relief washing over him. Finally, he thought, now someone in authority will take that disgusting, disrespectful thing down. The cruiser pulled to a near stop, its nose pointed directly at the fence. Solomon, from his vantage point across the street, could see the 2 officers inside clearly. The driver, a man, leaned across the passenger, a woman, and they both looked directly at the figure. Solomon watched, waiting, expecting them to turn on their lights, to get out of the car, to go and investigate this obvious and grotesque public nuisance. He saw the driver laugh. It was a clear, visible chuckle, his shoulders shaking slightly. The passenger officer, the woman, shook her head, a small, dismissive smile on her face. She said something to the driver, and he laughed again, a hearty, open-mouthed laugh this time. Then, with a final, dismissive glance at the decoration, the officer put the car back in gear and slowly, calmly, continued on his patrol, making the right turn into the heart of the enclave, the problem left behind. Solomon was stunned. He just sat there, the cold seeping into his bones, and stared at the spot where the cruiser had been. He felt a cold, hollow, and profoundly empty feeling spread through his chest. He had watched joggers laugh. He had watched teenagers mock. He had watched drivers take pictures. But this was different. This was the system. These were the police, the authorities, the people paid to protect, to serve, to see, and they had seen it. They had looked right at it, close up, and had judged it to be nothing more than a tasteless Halloween prank, not even worthy of a 2-minute investigation. The failure of the police, their casual, laughing dismissal, was a profound, deeply unsettling moment for Solomon. It retroactively validated the entire day of indifference. If the police saw it and did nothing, then it must be nothing, right? It cemented the figure's status as an object, a non-entity, a joke. The sun continued to set, the air growing colder, the shadows deepening. The figure on the fence was now just a dark, lonely silhouette against the rapidly darkening twilight sky. The police had driven by. The day was ending, and the figure remained, hanging in the cold, a silent, unheeded testament to a city's profound, collective, and now official blindness. Solomon zipped up his own worn jacket, a deep, unnameable dread beginning to curdle in his stomach. He was a fixture, yes, a piece of scenery, but he was also a witness. He hadn't just seen the figure, he had seen the reaction to the figure. He had watched the witnesses. His home was a small, sheltered alcove behind a low-lying brick wall that separated the sparsely used strip mall parking lot from the main road. It contained a neatly rolled sleeping bag, a small cooler for water, and a stack of dog-eared paperbacks. He was quiet, but he was not absent. He was an observer. From his post, he saw everything. He knew the neighborhood's rhythms better than the people who lived there. He knew which dog walker always had a spare granola bar. He knew which businessman, the one in the gray BMW, would sometimes hand him a crisp $5 bill without making eye contact. He knew which teenagers were kind, and which ones were cruel. And now, he knew that an entire neighborhood, from its joggers to its police, could look at something so disturbing and simply laugh. He felt a strange kinship with the prop. He, too, was something people looked at and chose not to see. He, too, was a problem to be ignored, a piece of unpleasantness to be driven past. He sat, a silent, unacknowledged witness to its comings and goings, and to its profound, horrifying blindness. Dusk in late October is not a gentle transition. It's a fast, cold, and decisive affair. The last vestiges of the sun's warmth vanished, and the temperature plummeted. The weak yellow streetlights on the highway flickered on, casting a sick, artificial, and unforgiving glow. Solomon pulled his thin, worn blanket tighter around his shoulders, his eyes drifting back, as they had, against his will, all day, to the figure on the fence. In the fading, ambiguous light of dusk, the figure was no longer a clear shape. It was a silhouette, a dark, heavy mass of bundled clothing. It was just a thing. But then, a car approached the intersection, a modified pickup truck, jacked high off the ground. Its headlights weren't the standard yellow. They were powerful, aftermarket high-intensity LEDs, and they were aimed high. As the truck made the turn, the bright, white, surgical beams swept across the undeveloped lot in a wide, blinding arc. For a brief 2 or 3 seconds, the figure was illuminated, not by the weak, yellow streetlight, but by the bright, white, modern glare. And in that flash of white light, Solomon saw the jacket. His mind, which had been foggy with cold and disgust, suddenly snapped into sharp, crystalline focus. It wasn't a cheap costume. It wasn't a random collection of tattered, generic rags. It was specific. It was a faded, olive-green M65 field jacket, the kind Solomon himself had worn years ago, the kind he was wearing right now, the kind you could find in any army surplus store. But this one was different. Even from 50 yards away, in that terrible, fleeting, halogen glare, he saw a patch of color on the left shoulder. Solomon's heart, which had been beating a slow, steady rhythm, gave a sudden, hard, painful jolt. He squinted, his focus sharpening to a razor's edge. A patch. It looked like a flower? He strained, his breath catching in his throat. His eyes now locked on the figure, desperately willing another car to pass, to light it up again. An SUV, its lights bright, rounded the corner. There. The headlights swept across the figure, and Solomon saw it clearly. Yes, it was a sunflower. A large, hand-sewn, embroidered sunflower patch, its yellow petals bright and unmistakable against the faded olive green. Solomon felt the blood drain from his face. The cold he felt was no longer from the autumn air. It was a deep, internal ice. He knew that jacket. He knew that patch. He had seen it a dozen times, just a week or two ago, in the warm, bright, and noisy day room of the Street Jude's shelter, the place he went for his one hot meal of the day. He tried to tell himself he was wrong, that it was a coincidence, a trick of the light, that his mind, tired and cold and hungry, was playing tricks on him. But the image was seared into his brain. That specific, worn-out green jacket with that specific, slightly lopsided, hand-sewn sunflower on the left shoulder. It was impossible. It couldn't be. But he knew, with a certainty that was rising in his throat like bile, that it was. It belonged to Maya. The name Maya echoed in Solomon's mind. And it wasn't an abstract. It brought with it a rush of clear, sharp, painful memories. Maya Harris, 31 years old. A kind, troubled woman with haunted eyes and a smile that rarely, if ever, reached them. She was a fellow, invisible, a regular at the Street Jude's shelter. They weren't friends, not in the conventional sense. The world on the margins didn't really allow for such simple luxuries. But they were allies. They were part of the same forgotten tribe. They would often share a cigarette in the cold alley behind the shelter, their conversations quiet, fragmented, spoken in the shared, weary language of the lost. He remembered her talking about the jacket. It was her most prized possession. She had found it at a thrift store, she'd said, and it was the warmest thing she owned. But the sunflower, she'd explained, she had sewn on herself, meticulously, with thread she had gotten from the church's sewing circle. "It's to remember the sun, Soul," she'd whispered to him one gray, drizzly afternoon, her gaze distant, fixed on the brick wall. "Even when it's gray, you gotta remember the sun is still up there, you know? Even if you can't see it." He remembered, with a new, sickening, cold clarity, that he hadn't seen Maya in a while. A week? Maybe 10 days? Her absence wasn't, in itself, alarming. Not for people in their world. People drifted. They found a temporary place on a cousin's couch. They got a 3-day bus ticket to another city. They checked into a detox facility. Or they simply vanished. Life on the margins was a constant, shifting, precarious state of impermanence. No one filed a missing person report when a homeless person didn't show up for soup, but he had asked about her. He remembered, just 2 days ago, asking one of the beat cops who sometimes walked through the shelter, a guy named Malone who knew most of the regulars by name. "Seen Maya lately?" Solomon had asked, his question casual, just making conversation. The cop had shrugged, his expression a familiar, weary mask of indifference and cynicism. "Come on, Soul," he'd said, not unkindly, but dismissively. "You know how it is. People from the shelter, they come and go. She's not missing. She probably just moved on, found a new spot, hooked up with some guy, maybe. She's a big girl. She'll turn up." The casual, dismissive words echoed in Solomon's head, mocking him. "She'll turn up." He looked back across the dark, empty road, at the figure hanging on the fence, the figure in the green jacket with the sunflower patch, the figure everyone had laughed at, the figure everyone had photographed, the figure everyone had poked with a stick, the figure the police themselves had looked at, laughed at, and ignored. The sick, rising dread in his stomach was now a full-blown, suffocating, visceral terror. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a prop. He knew, with a certainty that was as absolute and as cold as the concrete beneath his feet, that the Halloween decoration that the entire neighborhood had been ignoring all day was Maya. Night had now fallen completely, a thick, heavy blanket of cold and darkness. The affluent neighborhood of the enclave pulled its blinds, the warm, yellow squares of light from its windows, a stark, mocking contrast to the cold, dark street. The traffic had thinned to an occasional, passing car. Solomon sat in his alcove, frozen, his body rigid, his mind at war with itself. He was terrified. He was a 50-year-old homeless man. His entire, fragile existence was predicated on not being seen, not causing trouble, not crossing boundaries. Crossing that 4-lane highway, stepping into the dark, wealthy, and explicitly unwelcoming territory of the enclave, approaching a chain-link fence on private property in the middle of the night, it was a recipe for disaster. He knew the script. He could be arrested for trespassing, for vagrancy, for being a peeping Tom. He knew how it looked. He knew how he looked. A creepy homeless man lurking in the shadows. The very people who had ignored the figure on the fence all day would not hesitate to call the police on him the second he stepped onto their pristine grass. His fear was logical, born of long and bitter experience. He tried to reason with himself, to find a way out. It couldn't be. It was too monstrous, too impossible. He was just tired, cold, paranoid. It was a coincidence. A sick, terrible, unbelievable coincidence. Some other person owned a green jacket with a sunflower patch. It had to be. But the image of the patch, hand-sewn, slightly lopsided, was burned into his mind. He thought of Maya, of her quiet, sad smile, of her whispering, "It's to remember the sun." He thought of the joggers laughing, the teenagers poking, the police officers shrugging and driving away. A new, unfamiliar, and powerful emotion began to burn through his fear, a cold, righteous anger. If that was her, if that was Maya, and this entire, comfortable, safe neighborhood had let her hang there all day, let her be mocked, photographed, violated, he couldn't stay on his bench. He couldn't be invisible. Not anymore. The fear of what would happen to him was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was suddenly, shockingly, overshadowed by the greater, more profound horror of doing nothing. He was, perhaps, the only person in the entire city who knew that figure had a name, a history, a quiet love for sunflowers. Slowly, his old, stiff joints protesting, his body aching from the cold, Solomon stood up. He left the relative safety of his alcove, the meager collection of his life's belongings, and stepped out from behind the brick wall onto the empty sidewalk. He waited for a single car to pass, its red taillights disappearing into the darkness. And then, he began the long, slow, and terrifying walk across the dark, empty street, his footsteps echoing in the silence, moving toward the fence, toward the truth. The walk across the 4-lane road felt like crossing an ocean. Each step on the cold, cracked asphalt brought him closer to the manicured lawns of the enclave, a world he was meant to observe but never, ever enter. He reached the sidewalk on the other side, his heart hammering against his ribs so hard he felt it in his throat. The figure was just ahead, 10 yards away, hanging on the fence, dark and motionless, its back to him. He approached the chain-link fence, the "Keep Out" private property sign rattling faintly in the cold night breeze. He was close enough now. The dim, yellow streetlight from across the highway cast just enough of a glow. He could smell it. The smell hit him first, a faint, sweet, coppery odor, a sickeningly organic smell he knew instinctively was not plastic or latex. It was the smell of something that had once been alive and was now not. He knew that smell from his service, from deserts half a world away. "Maya," he whispered, his voice a dry, cracked sound, stolen by the cold. "Maya, is that you?" The figure did not move, did not respond. It just hung there, its arm hooked through the wire. He was closer now, just a few feet away, separated only by the fence. He could see her clearly, his eyes now adjusted to the dim light. The green jacket with the sunflower patch was unmistakable, rucked up in the back. Her head was hanging forward, her dark, matted hair completely obscuring her face. He had to be sure. He had to know. He looked up and down the street. It was deserted. No cars, no one watching from their windows. He found a spot where the fence was slightly bent, a gap near the bottom where the wire had pulled away from the post, wide enough for him to reach his arm through. His hand trembled, a violent, uncontrollable shake. He was terrified to touch her, terrified of what he would find, terrified of confirming what his heart already knew. "I'm sorry, Maya," he whispered, his voice thick with a grief he couldn't yet process. "I'm so sorry." He reached his arm through the cold, metallic diamonds of the fence. He stretched, his fingers reaching, and then he brushed them against the hand that dangled limply at her side. The contact was an electric shock, a jolt of pure, cold, horrifying reality. It was not the smooth, hard, unyielding surface of plastic. It was not the giving, tacky feel of rubber. It was skin. It was cold, yes, colder than the night air, and it was hard, rigid, and unmistakably, terribly human. Solomon snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned, a strangled, guttural cry catching in his throat. He stumbled back, his legs giving out, and he fell hard onto the damp, cold grass of the embankment. It was her. It was Maya. The full, monstrous, incomprehensible weight of the day, of the entire day, crashed down on him. The joggers, laughing. The mother, taking pictures of her delighted, screaming children. The teenagers, poking her with a stick, her arm rattling against the fence, stealing her ring. The police, laughing, as they looked right at her, as they saw a person and dismissed her as a joke. She had been here, all day. Not a decoration, not a prank. A person, a missing woman, a woman he knew. And everyone, had just let her hang there. An object of public amusement, a piece of trash on a fence. He scrambled to his feet, his mind fractured with horror, grief, and a blinding, incandescent rage that burned away his fear. He had to get help. He had to tell someone. He had to make them see. He had to make them finally see her. Solomon ran. He didn't know where he was going at first, his mind a white-hot blur of panic and horror. He ran from the fence, back across the dark, empty highway, his worn-out boots slapping against the asphalt, fueled by a terror that was so profound it left no room for his usual caution or his aching joints. He needed a phone. He couldn't go back to his alcove. Not now. He sprinted the 2 blocks to a 24-hour speedway station, a bright, sterile island of light in the sleeping suburbs. His lungs burned, his mind replaying the feel of her cold, rigid hand, the sound of the teenagers laughing. He fumbled in his pocket for a quarter, his hands shaking so badly he dropped it twice on the greasy concrete. He finally jammed it into the slot of the grime-covered payphone on the station's outer wall, the cold metal a shock against his skin. He dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm, almost bored. 911, what's your emergency? It's not a decoration, Solomon shouted into the receiver, his voice a choked, hysterical sob. The thing on the fence, it's not a prank, it's a body, a real body. On the fence, on the main road by the enclave, the one with the woods. Everyone thought she was a Halloween prank, but it's her, it's Maya. Sir, calm down, the dispatcher said, her tone suddenly alert, clicking into professional mode. What is your location? What is your name? My name is Solomon. I'm at the Speedway gas station. But the body is on the fence. You have to hurry. Everyone they left her there. Your own cops, they drove right by. They laughed at her. He was borderline incoherent, his words tumbling out, a torrent of grief, rage, and panic. Please, just send someone. They have to see her. He slammed the phone down, not waiting for a reply, and ran back towards the scene, a desperate, irrational need to stand guard, to not let her be alone anymore, pulling him back. By the time he got there, the night was alive with the flashing, pulsing red and blue lights of the first responding patrol car. It was the same car. He knew it was. The same 2 officers, the veteran and the younger woman, were stepping out. This time, their expressions were not amused. They were grim, their faces pale and shocked in the pulsing lights. Okay, dispatch said the call came from him. Solomon heard the veteran officer say, his voice low, spotting him hovering near the curb. Sir, stay right there, the female officer commanded, her voice sharp, her hand on her holstered weapon. Solomon, frantic, his hands raised, pointed towards the fence. It's her. It's Maya. I told you. I just found her. I touched her hand. It's real, he was babbling, his rage and grief making him sound unhinged. You drove right past her. You looked right at her. You laughed. This afternoon, you laughed. The officers exchanged a dark, horrified look. The veteran's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. This vagrant wasn't just a witness. He was an accuser. He was a direct threat to their careers. Sir, stay back, the veteran ordered. They approached the fence cautiously this time, flashlights trained on the figure. They got close, shined the light on her matted hair, her face, her hands. Solomon heard the younger officer's sharp intake of breath. My God, Frank, she breathed. The veteran officer swallowed, his face ashen. He keyed his radio, his voice strained and suddenly official. Dispatch. Confirm a 10 to 54, possible 187. The figure on the fence. It's a body. A real body. Secure the scene. Get detectives and the coroner out here. Solomon felt a wave of dizzying, nauseating relief. Finally, they see. They finally see. But as the 2 officers turned from the fence, their focus shifted from the victim to him. Their professional shock was replaced by a cold, defensive suspicion. They saw not a grieving witness, not the man who had found her, but a creepy homeless man, agitated, covered in dirt, found at 1 a.m. at the scene of a body, and accusing them of incompetence. What were you doing over here, Solomon? The veteran officer asked, his voice low and dangerous, his hand now resting on his sidearm. You said you touched her? I had to check, Solomon stammered. I knew her jacket. The sunflower. I knew her. Everyone just left her here. You knew her? The female officer said, her eyes narrowing as she stepped towards him. When was the last time you saw her? You 2 have a fight? She owe you money? Is that what happened? No. What? No, Solomon pleaded, his mind reeling from the sudden, jarring shift in their questions. I'm the one who called you. I'm the one who told you. Yeah, we know, the veteran said, his tone dark and cold. "You were watching us earlier, you said. You were here all day? Watching?" He advanced on Solomon. "Stand right there. Put your hands on your head. Don't move." The betrayal was swift, absolute, and suffocating. In their eyes, the complex, horrifying puzzle of the day's indifference was already solved. The violent homeless man and the missing shelter woman. It was a simple, tidy, and convenient explanation. He wasn't the witness. He was the easy answer. The arrival of the detectives and the coroner's van was a grim, efficient spectacle. The dark, quiet street was transformed into a floodlit, sterile stage. The neighborhood, its slumber interrupted by the flashing lights, began to emerge, residents standing on their pristine porches in expensive bathrobes, their faces pale with shock and a new, different kind of fear. The tasteless prank had suddenly become a horrifying, violent reality in their front yard. Solomon was separated immediately. He was placed in the back of the patrol car, the door shut with a solid, final thud. It was the same car he'd seen laugh and drive away. The irony was a physical sickness in his stomach. He was, for his own safety, they said, but it was a cage. Solomon spent the next 12 hours in a holding cell. It was colder than his alcove. The single, thin blanket they gave him smelled of bleach and old sweat. He was processed, photographed, his fingerprints taken. He was no longer a person. He was a file number. He was moved from the holding cell to a small, concrete interrogation room. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. He was running on pure, terrified adrenaline. A new man came in. He wasn't in uniform. He wore a rumpled suit and a tired, angry expression. He dropped a file on the metal table between them. "Solomon," he said, his voice like gravel. "I'm Detective Thompson. You're in a world of trouble, son." I didn't do anything," Solomon whispered, his voice hoarse. "I found her." "You found her," Thompson repeated, not as a question. He opened the file. "Let's talk about that. Let's talk about your friend, Maya." The next 2 hours were a blur of confusion and terror. Thompson's questions were traps, his words twists. "So you knew her from the shelter? You two. What? Friends? More than friends? You her boyfriend?" "We just talked sometimes. At the shelter. We were just people, troubled people." "She trouble Solomon? Drug trouble. She owe you money for drugs. You two get into a fight over it? Is that what happened?" "No, I didn't. I found her. I saw her jacket. I'm the one who told you she was real. Your own officers. They drove right by her. They laughed." Thompson's eyes hardened, his expression turning to stone. "Is that right? You were watching us, were you? You saw them drive by?" "Yes, this afternoon, around 4, Solomon said, thinking he was finally breaking through. "So you knew she was there all day?" Thompson pounced. "You just sat across the street and watched her all day, and you didn't call until 1 in the morning? What kind of sick game are you playing, old man?" Solomon's world tilted. "No, I didn't know it was her. I thought it was a prop. Just like everyone. Just like your cops." "Right, the cops," Thompson sneered. "The only reason you're bringing them up is to save your own skin. You're trying to muddy the water, but it's not going to work." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, cold growl. "Here's the problem, Solomon. You're a liar. You said you saw the sunflower patch from across the street, in the dark? The headlights. A truck with magical headlights, right. A nice, specific detail, that patch. A detail you could only know if you were up close. A detail only the killer would know. You just put your finger in your own eye. I swear. And you want to know what else is a problem?" Thompson said, his voice filled with sudden, cold rage. "The M.E. report. She didn't die on that fence. She was killed 3, maybe 4 days ago. Blunt force trauma. Someone hit her in the head, hard, with a rock or something. Kept her body somewhere. And then, Sunday night, they staged her. Posed her on that fence. Like a Halloween decoration." The detective's words didn't make sense. Solomon's exhausted mind couldn't process them. 3 days? Kept somewhere? I don't understand," Solomon stammered. I haven't seen her in a week. Oh, you understand, Thompson roared, suddenly standing, his chair scraping back. You watched all day. You sat there letting kids poke her with a stick. You watched your handiwork. What kind of man does that unless that was part of the game for you? You sick bastard. Solomon flinched back, pressing himself against the concrete wall. The detective's face was purple with rage. Every word Solomon said, every piece of his truth, was being twisted into a new, more horrifying shape. His panic was seen as agitation, his grief as guilt, his knowledge of Maya as proof of involvement. And now, this new, impossible timeline. It made his story of just finding her sound, even to his own ears, like a desperate, unhinged lie. Thompson stormed out, leaving Solomon alone in the echoing silence of the room. He put his head in his hands, his body shaking. He was trapped. The truth was useless. He didn't see the detective in the hallway, grabbing the two officers who had brought him in. He's lying, Thompson spat. But it's not enough. His public defender will say he's a confused old man and that we're the ones who screwed up. The media is crucifying us. We need something solid. He glared at the veteran officer. Go back to the scene. His encampment. Tear it apart. Find me the weapon. Find me a motive. And you, he jabbed a finger at the officer. You'd better find it. Your careers depend on it. Solomon knew nothing of this. He was just a man in a box, invisible again, but in a new, more permanent way. He was moved back to the holding cell, the metal door clanging shut with a final echoing thud. Hours passed. Or maybe it was just one. Time had no meaning in the gray, windowless room. He was dozing, his head on his knees, when the door clanged open again. It was Thompson, and his face was different. It was calm, satisfied, and filled with a cold, triumphant hatred. Solomon James, he said, his voice flat and official. You're under arrest for the murder of Maya Harris. What? Solomon's head snapped up. No. You have no proof. We do now, Thompson said with a thin smile. My officers, the same ones you tried to blame, did some actual police work. They searched the area around your little camp. He slid 2 photographs across the table. The first was of a public trash can, the one near the bus stop bench, the one Solomon used every day. The second was of the contents of a fast food bag, pulled from that can. Inside, there was a woman's small, cheap, vinyl wallet. And next to it, a heavy, palm-sized, jagged rock, its surface bearing faint, dark, reddish-brown stains. Recognize these? Thompson asked. We found her ID in the wallet. And the rock? It's a perfect match for the coroner's report. Blunt force trauma. Found just feet from where you sleep. You're a sloppy, stupid killer. Solomon. You try to pull off this elaborate, theatrical display, and then you dump the weapon and the wallet in the nearest trash can. Solomon stared at the photos, his blood turning to ice. It wasn't possible. It wasn't his. He'd never seen that rock, that wallet. That's not, he stammered. I didn't put that there. Someone put that there. It's a frame-up. A frame-up? Thompson laughed. A real, hearty laugh. Just like the one Solomon had heard from the police car. Right. The deep state is framing the homeless guy. Save it for your lawyer, old man. You're done. The detective stood, grabbing the photos. He leaned in one last time, his voice a whisper. And those 2 cops you tried to get fired? They're the ones who found it. They're the heroes of this story. And you're the monster. The case is closed. The next day, Solomon met his court-appointed lawyer. She was an exhausted, young woman named Sarah, her files overflowing. She sat across from him in a small, glass-walled room, her expression a mask of professional pity. Mr. James. Solomon, she said. I've read the police report. It's not good. They're lying, Solomon whispered, his voice cracking. I didn't do this. I found her. I was the only one who saw her. I understand, Sarah said, though her eyes said she'd heard this all before. But the evidence is strong. They have your confused testimony, as they call it. They have the fact that you knew her, and they have the physical evidence. The rock, Solomon said, his voice dead. And the wallet. They planted it. The cops who laughed. They planted it. Sarah sighed, looking down at her notes. Solomon, that's a very serious accusation. And right now, it's your word, a man with no fixed address against 2 decorated police officers. They're also saying you've been telling people the police laughed at the body, which the media is using as proof of your unstable and taunting nature. They're painting you as a calculating, arrogant killer who was mad at the world. She paused, then looked at him. And the ME report. It says she was killed days before. The DA's theory is that you had a fight, you killed her, and you kept her body in your camp, or a culvert somewhere, and then put her on the fence as some kind of statement. Solomon just stared at her. His world shrunk to the 7x10 concrete box he was in. He was bewildered, terrified, betrayed. The truth was gone. It had been stolen, twisted, and rebuilt into a monster, and that monster had his face. He was invisible again, swallowed whole by the very system he had tried, in his one single moment of visibility, to alert. I didn't, he whispered, his last bit of strength fading. I saw the sunflower. Sarah looked at him, her expression softening for a moment. What? On her jacket, a sunflower. She sewed it on, she said. She said it was to remember the sun, even when it's gray. I saw the sunflower. He was the only person in an entire city who had cared enough to see Maya, to recognize her humanity, to cross the street, to make the call, and for this one act of compassion, this one moment of seeing, he was the one who was jailed. The real killer. The person who had actually committed the violent act. The person who possessed the cold, calculating arrogance to pose Maya's body as a grotesque Halloween prank for the entire, indifferent neighborhood to see, was still out there. They were safe, protected by a neighborhood's indifference and a police force's prejudice, watching, perhaps with a cold smile, as an innocent, invisible man took the fall for their dark, terrible secret. The case was closed, but the real mystery, the identity of the true culprit, was just beginning.